like I said, I'm in New York still, in my hotel room with a curtain behind me. There you go, on my iPad, which seems a lot easier than my computer sometimes. So, sweethearts, yeah. So for 1 hour, we're going to be here together. Think, analyze, contemplate, take some tools away. That's the point. Don't just think of it as entertaining. I mean, I might be entertaining. People tell me I'm entertaining, but there has to be some purpose. There has to be a little learning in it, okay? So if there's any learning in it. So what to talk about today? What to say? I don't know. Better tell me. Ask questions, come on. Any burning questions, any issues people have? I remember one Lama, when he heard Western people talk, we always use the word issues. So they have, they talk about all the afflictions and the delusions.
Yes.
So they kind of added to the list of delusions one called an issue. So what issues have we got today? Who's talking?
Hi,
Lou.
Jacob.
Oh no.
Hello. Yeah, this is Richard.
Oh, I have to look at you. Wait, I can't find you. Where are you, Richard? Just a second. I've only got a few. Here you go, Richard. Yeah, talk to me.
Yeah, I was wondering, in Buddhism, what is the one action that if you do it now, if we all do it now, will set us totally free from all mental afflictions, mental disturbance?
That would be to realize emptiness.
24/7, once and for all.
Yeah, that would be to
now
realize
and
emptiness,
forever.
Richard. That would be, you need to have single-pointed concentration. You need to have access to your subtle level of mind, and you need to realize emptiness. But it takes a long time. So if everyone did that now, delusions would end. That's Buddha's view. But that takes a while to build up to. But that's if we were all to do that now.
So in Buddhism, there's no such thing as, in other words, for this to happen, right, without taking time. Is there such a thing as that?
No, of course not. Nothing's like that, is there? Nothing exists like that, is there?
So
nothing.
Well, I'm saying
everything's a process.
There's an action
with that?
that has
Richard, no, Richard. There's no action. That is an action. It's an action of the mind. But there's no action.
No,
I think.
Not an action of the mind.
It's
coming from another place.
There's no action of the body and speech is useless. That doesn't help. It has to be the mind, because it's the mind that causes suffering and the mind that causes happiness. That's the
Well, it could be the action of silence.
No, that won't do any good.
The action of stillness.
No, that wouldn't do it.
So in Buddhism, in other words, to make a long story short, in Buddhism, they have not found a way to set the human being totally free once and for all.
Yes, Buddha has found
down
that
forever
way.
without taking time, without effort, without choice.
No such thing, baby.
Without
no
time.
Such thing. No such thing, sweetie pie.
Well, that's not. Well, I found it.
Well, anyway, that's okay.
But I guess the Buddhists have not found it.
That's my answer, darling.
So the Buddhists have not found it.
I beg your pardon?
So therefore, the Buddhists have not found it.
As you wish. Whatever you'd like to say, sweetheart. I have found it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so happy for you, darling.
There is a way to do it without.
I'm very happy for you. I'm very happy for you, sweetheart. I'm so glad, Richard. Thank you very much.
And it has nothing to do with effort or.
Okay, that's good. I'm so happy.
Choice.
Buddha will be delighted to hear from you that someone's discovered this. This is marvelous. So you keep practicing. I'm so happy for you, Richard.
No,
please help others.
The practice.
I don't need to
denial of this thing.
What, darling? Hey, listen. It's okay. I'm very happy you found it. So keep practicing, okay? I'm so happy for you, Richard. And I want you, and you must help others with it. This is marvelous. Thank you so much. You're very kind. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Would anybody else like to ask me a question?
I would like to ask. Yes, thank you.
Who is this?
Christine.
Good, Christine. Talk to me, sweetheart.
Do you have a suggestion on how to explain the concept of impermanence to children? Let's say ages 10 and under, without creating fear or anxiety?
Well, the only way you can do that is by you knowing it and you understanding it. So tell me, what do you think? I mean, we have to know how to talk to others, don't we? So, I mean, impermanence is just natural life, isn't it? Things change, don't they?
Absolutely.
So I think you help. The wise way is when something happens, you point it out to somebody. Like they maybe break something and they'll cry. And you'll say, well, that's how things are, isn't it? Things always change. Yesterday you were 2.5 and today you're 1 day older. little things like this. You look at the flowers growing. You use simple examples right in front of them. Don't make it too intellectual. Make it experiential. I mean, look at the garden. Look at everything. You know, that's what impermanence means, I think. But of course, they have to want to hear it and want to try and apply it, because it's still a concept, isn't it? Because when you're very little, you don't want to know about such things, do you? We grasp at things very strongly, don't we? So I think simple examples like that, things that are obviously in front of you, you know?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, good, Christine. What else, people? Yes, Christine.
Could you give us your thoughts and teachings on an unpleasant thing that I don't know how to deal with, and that's phobias?
What is it, sweetheart? I didn't hear that. It wasn't so clear, Christine.
Phobias.
Phobias, that's interesting, isn't it? Fears of things, you know. That's very common. We all have something, don't we? Huh?
Beg your pardon?
We all have something that we're afraid of, don't we? I mean, phobia is just a Greek word for fears, isn't it? It's very strong fears. Is that correct?
It is. The phobia that I have of spiders, I'm a biologist. I don't.
That's interesting. Wow.
Yeah, right.
It's
kind of a handicap. It's kind of a handicap. But, you know, I'm not actually afraid of spiders.
Right.
I have a severe phobia. And
so say you don't have fear, but you call it an extreme phobia. So that would sound, I mean,
it's an irrational reaction.
Okay, that's fear. That would be fear.
Okay.
That is fear. See, the Buddhist I can give you the Buddhist analysis, Christy, and then it's a question of working with it. It's sort of helpful, as given that you're a biologist, you like to understand why something is. So let's look at the Buddhist analysis of it. And that is, you know, in the mind, as you know well, if you've been listening to Buddhism, you've got these neurotic states of mind, these deluded states of mind, and they are actually, their character is really fear. I mean, we don't think of it this way. If you see a person shouting and yelling in anger, we would just say, oh my God, look how angry they are. But if you analyze it, the person's having quite a mental breakdown. They're screaming, the words are irrational, they're seeing as if the whole world is collapsing. It's clearly an exaggeration. It's clearly a distortion. Well, the Buddha's view is attachment and aversion, these very cute sounding simple words, these two primordially deep neurotic states of mind that run our show daily, and which are the basis of all the other dramas we have. They're both rooted in this root neurosis, this primordial misconception deep in the bones of our being, so primordial that we don't really articulate it. It's so utterly instinctive that posits a very strong sense of a separate concrete me. And when anything that in our own experiences, when that arises very strongly, when we meet something or hear something or, you know, think of something that attacks that. And so for you, obviously, in the Buddhist view of karma, you've got some history with creatures labeled spiders, and that triggers very strong memories deep in the bones of your being. We don't articulate them as memories, but that's what the Buddha would say. Our mind goes back and back and back. We've got karmic connections with billions of beings. Everything we've experienced is stored in our memory. So then even though we've forgotten it, like as if you're a child and there's something, you've got a phobia about dogs, because when you're 2.5, you were bitten by a dog. Well, the Buddhist view would say that we go back further and further. So anything that causes us a lot of panic or fear or distaste, equally, things we're very attracted to, that's because we've had a connection with them before. So obviously there's something about spiders. You've had some connection with spiders, beings like that. And so when you see them again, this thing arises in your mind. I mean, that's the reasoning behind it. And so the other one is, therefore, how do you deal with that? I mean, often I don't know what it's like for you, but sometimes we tend to assume these phobias are absolute and can't change. But like anything, we can learn to unpack and unravel the mental state. And so, and one of the approaches, let's say you have strong anger towards something, which is really just based in fear because you can't stand to see it. That's why people have panic attacks. Then you will learn, you know, maybe you can learn a process of, of going against. I mean, when does the phobia arise? Is when you see a spider, when you think of a spider, when you read about one? What is it?
It's when it starts. When I see it, I have nightmares. I've even hallucinated under stress. When I see it, but most especially when it begins to move, when it's moving,
Mhm.
or when it's afraid, or when someone's killing it.
Exactly. Yeah. I understand. I mean, yeah. So, I mean, just that little explanation, that's the Buddhist analysis of it, the Buddhist psychological analysis, the strong connection. I mean, that's even why we are attracted to some things. It's exactly the same. You've got a connection with it. So strong, some people we meet, we can't stand the sight of them immediately. You wouldn't call that a phobia, but that strong aversion to certain people, certain ideas. We have strong attraction to certain people, certain ideas. They're not random events. They're all driven by the connections we have made in many lifetimes and that are stored in our mind as memories. So, if you want to, I mean, do you have an approach to how to break it down and to go beyond the phobia? Do you have an approach yourself, or just let it be?
I don't know what to do.
You can't analyze it in any way. You can't break it down and know that it's not. And we all know they're not rational. We know anger isn't rational. We know attachment's not rational. And that's really a good point in the Buddhist view. But the Buddhist view is these states of mind are not set in stone. So we have to start unpacking them. You start to analyze. I mean, one approach could be to realize that spiders are sentient beings and they just want to be happy. So protect yourself. You don't want to die, but learn to try and find, I mean, like exactly the same way that if I have strong aversion to somebody, I can learn to break that aversion down and to try and tell myself good qualities about that person. So slowly I literally paint a new picture. So then maybe loving kindness will eventually arise in my mind to replace the aversion. Well, it's exactly the same with the fear. It's still a state of mind. And so it's, technically it's irrational, that. And so, but all delusions are irrational, Christy. That's what's interesting. They're very old habits. And so we can learn to break down. So then think of the qualities of a spider, think of, or try to keep, this is the only way to break down any delusions, anger, attachment, jealousy, or anything, is to not just accept it as a given, not to see it as absolute, and to know to try and unpack it and see the being, the object of those thoughts in a different way, to try and paint a new picture. I mean, this is how we change our mind every day. This is the Buddhist approach. This is what Buddhist practice is. It's just that this instinctive primordial fear is just more deep than the others. That's all. I don't know. Is that useful at all, those thoughts, that approach?
Yeah, I understand from listening that I should meditate on the animal as a being that wants.
I mean, that would be one approach, to try and chip away slowly. I mean, even if you have nightmares, that's a pretty intense memory deep in your bones. That really is a way of putting it. That's pretty strong that you even have nightmares. That's pretty powerful. That's quite a strong one.
I find that I'm a very controlled person.
Yes.
Kind of disconcerting when I encounter a tiny little bug that
of course
I consider to be a beneficial bug that
that's right.
To like seizures and stuff. I don't.
No, I know, it's interesting, but I mean, I think if you put it in the framework, the Buddhist approach, that all the delusions, they're all in their nature delusional, exaggerated, I-based, and fear-based, and there's just a question of degree. So we call it phobia in we'll have all Greek or Latin words for anything, but basically it's just the ego grasping, this root delusion rising strongly, and a feeling of being threatened. I mean, that's the Buddhist way of putting it. But it's not set in stone. Maybe even just to have a few thoughts and maybe have a little compassion, a few thoughts of compassion, that could help counteract it. I mean, at a subtler level, for sure, every thought you have, does something in your mind. So even having a few compassionate thoughts about a sentient being who's born as a spider, can you imagine their mind? Can you imagine their fear 1 billion times stronger than yours? Even just to think that in a safe place, in your meditation, and maybe say a few Om Mani Padme Hums, a few compassion mantras, that can help. It's a tiny little antidote to the other part of your mind. But slowly, slowly, Christy, kind of crack the door open. Do you understand?
Okay, I do plant the seeds.
Yeah, that's it. Slowly, slowly, slowly chip away, slowly. Because every thought does count. And our trouble in our culture, and I'm not saying you think this, is when these emotions are very strong, we do see them as absolute. We do see them as like utterly permanent, unable to be changed. But that's the miracle. We know that the mind is not set in stone. Even if it's the most primordial phobia, like you're talking, we can still chip away at counteracting it quietly, slowly, drop by drop. You understand, Christy? That's the approach, I'd say. Thank you so much. Very interesting. Yes, who's that? Gina. Hello, darling. Talk to me.
Hi. I just wanted to really quickly apologize to Anna. She had said hi this morning, but I wasn't able to respond. I was figuring out my audio. Sorry about that.
Okay.
But I think you kind of already answered the question, but I was wondering, just like these fears are because of our past karmic actions and stuff like that, or things that happened in the past.
Yeah.
All of us gathered here doing this work. Does that mean that in our past lives we did some of the work already? And that's why, we feel a draw to this?
Exactly. See, that's the view about karma. To put it in the most simple way, this is the law, as far as the Buddha is concerned, that runs the universe. It's this natural law. No one created it. It's not punishment. It's not reward. It's a very natural process. And it's really just called habit. Everything you do, like if you met a person when you were 5 years old and you had a really lovely relationship and you loved each other a lot, and 35 years later you met again, you'd immediately run back and hug them because the memory is there. If you had a person who was mean to you when you were 5, you'd have this aversion if you saw them again. So everything is that. Everything is that. That is what we are. We come into this life programmed, sweetheart, with our own tendencies, negative or positive. And so that's the saving grace. And therefore we know we're just a bunch of tendencies. We know we're just a bunch of habits. We can change habits. That's what I was really talking to Christy. We can change habits. So yeah, of course, if you've got a connection with things, you meet a person, you meet people, you meet ideas, and you're attracted or you have aversions because we've connected before. Absolutely. And that's why exactly the same, when I always think about either the greatest practitioners, the Buddhist practitioners who come into this life literally fully programmed with all the virtue, all the goodness, all the wisdom. They're already developed. They've already done it, and it's exactly the same in ordinary things. I mean, you go online and I see these little children playing music at the age of 5. They're playing Bach and this complicated stuff. You can't believe your eyes. There's the only way to explain it, I would suggest, is that they've done it before. I mean, it's fairly evident, really. You do whatever you're used to doing. You have habits, I mean, I always use the example of everything, of course, that's absolutely the view of karma. So yes, that's right, Doria.
Thank you.
Okay. Who else is there?
Me, I think I'm next.
Good, I'm happy. Talk to me.
Thank you. So my fear is of being raped. And I have recurring, like, it's not daydreaming, but I guess nightmaring. And I have been harassed in the past, not raped.
Yeah.
I guess like almost every woman in the planet. But yeah, I have this constant fear. And
so then what's the question?
So I can see how you can practice with a spider.
Yes.
I wouldn't know how to translate that to a person who rapes.
But that's a more general thing. I mean, Chrissy's talking about, she sees the being and then it rises in her mind. Is that what happens every time you see a man? You panic and think that they're going to rape you? Or is it just you have a general fear of being raped? You're scared to go out at night and things like that, but not of anybody specific.
Exactly. Not in specific.
Okay. So, but that's a very and that's if you analyze, using this way of analyzing things, everybody has fears. Of one kind or another. It's just a question of degree. I'm not trying to belittle any of it, but everybody, people don't like being at night on their own. People don't like, certain colors. People don't like aeroplanes. Everybody's got something that we have aversion to and enormous fear of. It's a question of degree. So in the general approaches, you learn to, some people have so much fear they can't even walk outside their house. They imagine every possible thing happening. People who live in a lot of anxiety, that's all they're doing. They're living in fear. Anxiety is another word for fear. Some people are anxious, worried about getting poor, worried about dying, worried about people leaving them, worried about having no money. They're so overwhelmed they can't even live their lives. That's human beings, isn't it, Laura?
Yeah.
So, you know, it's like, the fact is, it doesn't mean you won't be raped. You might well be raped one day. That's always a possibility, isn't it? So in a way, you know, like, I mean, I remember a person, I always quote this, one woman in one of the teachings, and she said she lives in constant fear that her husband will die. So this is also the same kind of thing. So she said, what can I do? And I said, well, you know, one of the approaches is you face it. I said, he will die one day. That's a fact. He might die after you, he might die in 50 years, or he might die tomorrow. So, you know, we can be afraid of something and then imagine it's going to happen and become completely paralyzed. The fact is, you could be raped, sweetheart. You could be poor. The house could burn down. You could die. These are facts. So the more we understand that we're not clairvoyant, we don't know what's going to happen, all we can do is try to live our life in a reasonable way and be reasonable and protect yourself and do sensible things. Don't walk around at 3 a.m. with no clothes on, shouting, hoping a man will come. He will, I promise you. You don't do that. You be reasonable. You act reasonably. And then, you know, the more you practice internally, the more you work on your mind, the more you develop fearlessness in the face of life with optimism, and you practice good qualities, then when dramas do happen, you'll be able to deal with it, you know. But to live in fear of things, well, just, it's literally paralysis. You're ground to a halt. So it's learning to, and another interesting point, and this is something also for Christy, this is an interesting point. Well, no, I mean, yours is very general. It's not about specific types of people. I mean, when you walk down the street and you see men, you don't have aversion and have panic and fear, do you? It's just this idea of being raped, right? Is it?
Yeah.
Is that true? Yeah, well, you see, any kind of fear, it's interesting, any kind of paranoia, when you see beings who harmed you, thinking they'll harm you, then that's often the result of our own having harmed in the past. So which is why the antidote I gave for Christy is to have compassion. And even that'll do good for you too. Just generally try to have compassion, try to think compassion, because having fear that something heavy will happen, imagining it will happen, that's one of the consequences of your own harming in the past, that it arises as this strong paranoia, you know, or fear. So maybe just practice more compassion. That might lessen the fear. You understand? That's one direct approach. Just general compassion for sentient beings. But at the same time, you've got to practice wisdom and be reasonable, you know, be practical. But these fears are in there because of some past actions we've done. I mean, this is the point. Nothing is there in a random way. It's got some logical basis. Could be 1,000 lifetimes ago, the Buddhist approach, you know. Do you understand, darling?
Yes. Thank you.
Good. Who else has some points?
We have a question in the chat box.
Yes.
And it's from Christine, asking, could you speak about the Western study of Buddhist psychology and Buddhist philosophy, the difference between the two subjects and their value, if any, in Western society?
Well, it's a very big question, isn't it? So what can I say? I mean, I don't know enough about Western psychology, but what I can say is the Buddhist approach is that the mind, you know, it's got a very, in many radical ways, it's quite different. I mean, the purpose of psychology is a Greek word, because all these Greek words, isn't it? It's just the Greek word, the study of the mind. Well, that's Buddha's expertise, I would say that. So Western people study the mind, neuroscientists study the mind, psychiatrists study the mind, and a Buddhist would study the mind. The difference would be the Buddhist fundamental point, which is radically different, is that your mind is not your brain. This is very shocking for us to hear. It sounds like complete superstition. It doesn't mean we haven't got a brain. It doesn't mean you can't study the brain. The brain is, like, for me, a physical indicator of what goes on in your mind. So, you know, to know the mind in the Buddhist approach, we learn it first theoretically. You study the contents of the mind. Buddhism's got a very detailed presentation of the different states of mind, but we're not discussing anything physical. And the other really radical difference in Buddhist approach, you know, in the materialist approach, in the modern approach, you know, because we consider that our mother and father actually made us, created us, gave us a mind, but for the Buddha not, they gave us a body. So we see our parents are our source. So then we look very strongly, I think, in the materialist view of the mind. We look always at the conditions. We look at the mummy and the daddy and what they did to us and what happened when you were 6 and 4 and what happened to you, what your boyfriend did to you. We look into those conditions as a method of understanding our own depression and our own anger and our own jealousy, for example, or our own fears. The Buddhist approach, you can do that, but that's very secondary. The Buddhist approach is very direct. And I think even most of us Buddhists find it quite hard because the instinct is to want to blame the outside. Well, I'm angry because my father did this. It's not my fault. That's a very strong view we have in our modern culture. And that's ego's view. The Buddha's view is very direct, and you learn to look into your own thoughts themselves. You know, and if you're trying to help somebody else, you don't need to know what happened when they were a child. You just get to know that person and their own states of mind. You understand their anger, you understand their jealousy, you understand their depression. You don't need to know about the external. That's quite a surprise to us, I think, if we hear that. But that's very much the Buddhist approach. Because it's what goes on in the mind. And you know, yes, your father might have beaten you, and yeah, that's why you're angry. And yes, your mother might have been kind, that's why you're loving. You know, you could say that. But they're only the external conditions. The anger has to have been in your mind in order for it to arise when your father beats you. Your father's beating is not the main cause of anger coming in your mind. It's quite a technical point. The anger is already there. Because of why? Because you practiced anger before. So the Buddhist approach is what's in your mind is yours, and its source is your past habits. That's the major difference, I'd say. That's a major difference. And that implies the major difference in practice, that there's nothing in our mind we can't change. You maybe can change the external world, but that's, you know, you can change the external world, fine, but the real one to change is your mind. That's the most certain thing. That is and then lessening our delusions and lessening our anger and jealousy and fears and depression and growing our goodness and love and compassion. And this is Buddhist method for getting happy. That's the major difference, I'd say.
That is an excellent answer. Thank you so much.
That was useful, Christine?
Yes, excellent answer. Thank you so very much for that.
Good, darling. Very helpful. I'm very happy. Thank you. So yes, Colleen has a question. Hello, sweetheart. Unmute, darling.
Oops. So I wanted to ask about what the Buddha says about like honesty and integrity of speech. And
Yes.
for a context in my own life, I struggle with like intense guilt and shame sometimes that are sometimes distorted. And so, and the way I deal with that sometimes is I feel like I need to tell people exactly, you know, I need to confess my sins all the time. And
Yeah, right, darling.
Being
yes,
a Catholic, growing up Catholic and all of that.
Yes, Colleen.
But you know, I don't know if some of it's like reassurance speaking from other people. You know, I just
that's very strong
bad,
part of it,
right?
That's right. Now, this is a very, very, very strong part of it, darling. There's a mixture of things here. First of all, you know, this, you know, attachment, as Buddha talks, is a very primordial neurotic state of mind, and it manifests in a multitude of ways. The obvious way is sort of the most external, like sex and drugs and rock and roll, always wanting more satisfaction from things out there. But the more internal one is, you know, and this particular one you're pointing to, is attachment to being a good girl. Honestly, it sounds so cute and simple, but we've all got it to one degree or another. But it's really quite primordial. And especially if I look at you, I can see that you don't get very angry, do you? You're probably a nice girl, right? That's right, isn't it? Okay, then. Well, then, darling, the way it is with you, then, you know, you try to be a good girl. You try, since you're born, so this is how it is. It's very primordial. Since we're tiny babies, even, we're always, we're sort of, if mummy smiles at us, this part of us is kind of, almost like we're thinking, I'm a good girl. She's smiling at me. And we want that response all the time. So as soon as mummy is not very kind to us, we have a panic attack. And then we think, oh my God, what did I do wrong? And then you believe you did do something wrong, even though it's all mummy's problem. She's just angry, but you think you're the naughty girl. And then you think you've got to confess it all and make up to her. And you can exaggerate completely your badness. And the reason you're doing that is because you're judging yourself according to the way other people respond to you. This is our nightmare, Colleen. People go crazy with this. If we are judging continuously ourselves based on how other people respond to us, we will go kill ourselves eventually. It's too tortured because, you know, and that's the major suffering, darling girl. So you have to stop confessing. 99% of the time you haven't done anything wrong. You know, you're not perfect, sure. But then secondly, you've got to have this really strong, gradual ability to develop the clarity and the confidence that you are who you are and you're doing what you have to do because you figure it's appropriate, and whether or not someone likes it is their problem and not yours. It doesn't have to be like an arrogant thing, like I don't care what people think, but it's quite subtle. And this is what every one of us has to do, sweetheart. And then the other one, of course, is because of all that, we want the other person to say, oh, it's all right, Colleen, I still love you. And then you feel like you're off the hook again. And that's very naughty. We've got to learn to be our own boss. We've got to learn to love ourselves and respect ourselves and be our own policeman and, you know, grow up, in other words. It's very simple, but very profound, sweetheart. It's the deepest attachment that we've all got. Are we communicating? Does it sound like you?
Yeah, it does. It definitely does. And yeah, and I think just holding back and, you know, not looking for reassurance is
that's right. It's
a good practice for me.
That means learning to know our own mind ever more deeply, ever more deeply, and having the confidence that I have to make the choices. It doesn't mean you can't ask advice. It doesn't mean you can't get people's opinions, but we have to have to grow this certainty because we have to live our own life, Colleen. And this is the words are simple, but it's a profound level of practice. It's what most of us lack, you know, where most of us living in yearning to be approved of by others. We even judge our own selves by that. We even judge our happiness by that. It's very fragile because it can go at any time. We know that. You can't, you know, if you're relying on everybody loving you, you'll go mad. So we've got to, you know, and when we're more steady in ourselves and with more self-confidence, we'll still want to be kind to other people. But if they don't respond, we're not going to see it as personal. You know, we're going to be more strong and internal, growing up in ourselves. This is a simple, ordinary way of putting what you're trying to do from the Buddhist point of view. They don't speak it like this, but it's like that. You know? Do you understand, darling?
Yeah, thank you.
Keep practicing, honey. Keep having confidence in yourself. Who else is there, Anna? What else is there, darling?
Nothing in the chat, Venerable.
Nothing in the chat.
Nothing.
Well, I think this one is really, I mean, we could talk about this for centuries, this one that you know, that Colleen brought up. And it's really interesting.
Laura.
Huh?
Sorry,
yes,
Venerable,
Laura.
we have Laura.
Yes, Laura, darling.
I have a question. A few weeks ago, I asked about the purification meditation. I don't remember the 4 R's. It's regret.
Yeah, so I think it's good if we put something on in the chat box and you can get it and use it and learn it. I will do that. I will put a little version of the practice in the chat box and you can get it from there before I leave the class. I can do that. But the whole, let's talk about this. This is very powerful psychologically, Laura. Again, it's done in a very formal kind of way as a meditation, but it's a very powerful psychological process. And it's part of our growing up, you know. So on the one hand, like with, say, Colleen's one, always trying to be the good girl, always trying to be approved of. And then when we do bad things, we get so overwhelmed and so guilty. And that's just another neurosis. Guilt is just anger against ourselves, you know, and we've really got to learn not to be like that. So this first step is really important one. It's called regret, but we hear it as guilt. Basically, the attitude of regret is a bit like, it's the example of, say, you've got a tendency to be, you know, you shouldn't eat sugar, let's say, because it's not good for your health. And every time you eat sugar, you know, guilt would be, oh, I ate sugar again, I'm such a bad person. So you keep getting more miserable. But regretting eating sugar, in this use, the way they use the word here, it's a much more healthy attitude. You own responsibility. you did eat the sugar. You did it because you love your sugar. You couldn't say no, or you didn't know there was sugar there. So you don't feel guilty. Oh, I'm a bad person. I ate sugar. That's useless. You've got to cultivate this view. And I'm using an example of food. I'm not discussing food really, but it's an analogy. So then your attitude would be, well, I didn't realize it was sugar. And or I'm just weak and I kept saying yes to sugar. But I regret having done that because I don't want the future suffering. It's a very practical attitude. So that would be healthy. So the same here with your mind. Let's say let's say you harm others, or you badmouth people, or you killed the ant, or whatever it is you think is a negative action. And because of the view of karma, you're producing yourself moment by moment, and you don't want to have all these negative tendencies being produced. So you have to do this process, this practice at the end of the day. Lama Zopa says we're crazy not to do it every day, because we're continually producing ourselves. That's the meaning of karma. So the first step is you acknowledge, okay, I did a bad mouth my boyfriend. I kicked the dog. I killed the ant. Whatever you did that day. And you're not out of guilt, oh, I'm a bad person. But you go, I did do that. And then you say, I regret having done it because I don't want to continue this habit. I don't want this suffering. It's like compassion for yourself. We have to cultivate that. Guilt is a very strong habit in all of us. But guilt is useless. It's anger. That's all. It's useless. So you have this attitude of regret. I did do it, but I regret having done it because I don't want the future result. I don't want to sow those seeds in my mind. I don't want to develop the habit to kill or lie or steal. I don't want that. So I regret it because I don't want the future suffering. That's the attitude of regret. Then the next one it leads to is the next one, the 4 R's, is reliance. And there's 2 parts there. The first one is because we're doing this practice in the framework of being a Buddhist. So you're visualizing, you're thinking, well, whom can I turn to? Where's the doctor? Whom can I return? Whom can I, rely upon to give me the medicine? Because you do the purifying, not the Buddha. Where's the doctor? So we think of the Buddha, and we visualize in the meditation that we do, we would visualize the Buddha above our crown, and we'd be delighted that we found methods that we can use to purify ourselves. That's reliance, the first part. Refuge. The second part is now in the second step. You'd think of those sentient beings that you harmed. The boyfriend you badmouthed, the mother you were mean to, the dog you kicked, the ant you killed, and you now have compassion. You regret for the sake of others now. I regret having harmed sentient beings. I know what it's like to be harmed, and I have such compassion, and I must purify myself for their sake. So the second step, including compassion. Then the third step, the remedy. So we do a little meditation where you visualize, you say the mantra of the Buddha, you visualize purifying. And the fourth step would be the resolve to not do it again. So this is a very practical psychological process. Does it make sense, Laura?
Yes.
Because there's no thing we can't change in the mind. There's no imprint. There's no karmic seed we can't purify. There's no habit we can't change. There's no tendency we can't change. So it's very encouraging. This was one step at a time. This is a really good practice to do at the end of the day, because we have so much guilt. We build up so much tension inside ourselves. I'm bad. Those people don't like me, and I did something wrong. And it's just very tortured. And that guilt is just anger. Think of guilt. Guilt is saying, I did this and I did that, and then we conclude, and I'm a bad person. That's guilt. It's so inappropriate. It's exaggerating. It's exactly the same as anger with somebody else. You did this and you did that, and you're a bad person. So guilt is anger. It's very painful, and it's just not appropriate because it's exaggerating. You see, one of the key qualities of all the delusions is they exaggerate. So attachment exaggerates the deliciousness of the boyfriend and his role in making me happy. And then anger, when he gives me up for a younger version, then anger for the boy towards the boyfriend over exaggerates his badness and his role in making me suffer. So they all exaggerate. Well, guilt is the same. It's an exaggeration of my badness. It's a terrible state of mind. It's so painful, and we love it. We run to it very easily. So we really got to watch our minds so carefully and not go on and indulge in guilt. Being brave, admitting I did do something wrong, that's perfect. That's not guilt. That's intelligence. That's grown up. Well, I did do that. Not, oh, I did it, I'm a bad person and I'm even worse than everybody. No, I did do it, but guess what? I can change. That's the powerful attitude to have. It's very important.
Thank you.
All right, darling. But guilt is, you see, the thing is too, this guilt and this craving to be approved of, these are very, very subtle in the mind, especially the craving to be approved of. It's very, very deep. It's even hard to, in some people we can see it easily, but many times it's very subtle. They say it's the last attachment to really go before you've got realizations, It's like they always have this saying, the yogis up in the mountains, these great meditators who've given up sex and drugs and rock and roll and everything, are still thinking about, up in the mountains, in their cave, the ones who really haven't yet fully realized everything, they're still thinking about what the people in the village are thinking about them. This is very strong. And if you look into our minds, a lot of our mental activity is conversations with other people, what other people think, what we're going to say to people, how they think about us, so this is a lot of conversation in our head is like that. And that's all rooted in this attachment to being approved of, to being seen. I mean, and you think about that, that's what we mean by success in the world. If, you write, say Christie writes some biological paper and gets famous because of it. I mean, we can see that, it's marvelous to be approved of. It's good to have success. It's good for people, your peers, to approve of you. But when we can hang on to that as if that shows that I'm a really valid person, then when you lose that, or when someone else writes a better paper, then you become shattered and think you're the worst person on the planet. So they're both extreme, I mean, it's interesting. I'm in New York, I told you, and one of our friends here, he's often here, Jamie, you've seen him around. He lives in the UK and he's a West End theatre director. And he was nominated for a few awards. And he talked about one person there who had also been nominated at the Tony Awards. He'd been nominated, this other person. And he said, he's a bit of a show off, this fellow, kind of otherwise a bit arrogant. And he was so shattered when he didn't get the award, he burst into tears and rushed out of the theatre. Now, that's because he didn't get the approval he was craving. That's a classic example of both arrogance, but also attachment to reputation. He was shattered. He wasn't able to rejoice in everybody else winning. He was so upset, He burst into tears and ran out of the theatre. I mean, that must be very painful, mustn't it? That's attachment to reputation and pride. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So it's and we have this as very deep inside us. We all have this. And then that's the irony of ego, the Buddhist view of ego, this root delusion called ignorance that really believes in the intrinsic, separate, definite, permanent, inherent me. But one of the consequences of this, as Lama Yeshe points out in his Mahamudra book, that is that very rigid feeling of me here. It produces the very concept of other over there. So you can see this when you're very deluded, when you're very angry or very arrogant. There's you here and look at all this world out there. There's a huge separation, isn't there? But when you're more virtuous and kind and patient and humble, there's not that terrible division. A person who's humble will delight in the person who won the Tony Award. Even if that person wasn't as good as them, they'd be happy for them, so they don't suffer. There's a feeling of connectedness. The virtues are more connected to other people. The delusions are what separate us from other people. They make us totally self-centered, and that's not criticizing us. That's why we suffer. Having anxiety is incredibly self-centered. I mean, you're thinking of yourself the whole time and all the bad things that might happen. It doesn't mean you should feel bad. Don't criticize yourself. The Buddha's telling us that that's why we suffer, but but our trouble is we hear that and then we get guilty. Oh, I'm a bad person, am I? It's all my fault, is it? No, don't feel that. Buddha's trying to have compassion for us. And he says we've got to have compassion for ourselves. It's our attachment and our fears that cause us suffering. So we should be kind to ourselves. That's where guilt is so wrong. Guilt just beats us up. It's useless. It just increases. You see anger in your mind and then you get guilty about it. So you've just added another delusion to the anger. So you keep adding more delusions. It's craziness. So we've got to have courage to own our delusions, to own our mistakes. So then but that means we have to also own our good qualities. So ego is kind of looks like it's always, we always, obsess with our negative qualities. But we've got to also talk about our good qualities, have a more balanced picture. Then it's easy to see your faults, and then you don't get guilty because you know you can change them. This is so important, Jenna. What are you, darling? People got 10 more minutes still. Look, come on. What questions? Any more? Or maybe that's enough.
Robina,
Yes,
I have a
who's that?
question. It's
My battery's running out. I'm forever behind on my batteries here. I've got to plug in. Hang on. I've got to hold the iPad. It's so inconvenient. Okay, talk to me. Come on. Talk to me.
I
Who is
have a
it?
question, Venerable Robina. First of all, thank you for your teachings.
Okay,
Could you talk
darling.
about, I'm not sure exactly what method means. Does that mean practice?
Oh, you mean when you talk about wisdom and method?
Yes, yes.
I know. It's just the way they talk, darling. It's how they talk. I mean, I use the analogy of the two wings of the bird all the time, right? And they talk about, and I talk about wisdom and compassion. Well, they often talk about, it's more technical point about the approach of the practice. So the wisdom practice finally is to do with meditating and unpacking and unraveling the delusions and realizing emptiness. That's the final actual wisdom part. And so it's all very internal and precise. Then from removing the delusions, you literally get clearer and wiser, and you're more in touch with how everything exists. Now, the compassion wing, they call that the method, the act, sort of like it's kind of odd, method, method. It sounds weird, but it's probably, the wisdom is internal in the mind, and compassion is action. Compassion is related to others. I don't know why they call it methods. It's rather odd, actually. I don't understand it, to be perfectly frank. They talk about wisdom and method all the time, but it's so the wisdom combined with the method is finally the compassion wing. So the wisdom in your own mind of ridding the mind of the delusions and getting clearer and clearer about reality, and then combined with practicing love and compassion and all the virtues, these two together are what turn you into the Buddha. So one is the wisdom wing and one is the method wing. They call it that, and it's the proactive action of working the bodhisattva, going from life to life, practicing compassion in relation to sentient beings. I don't know how else to say it. I don't quite know why they use that word, to be perfectly honest. It's true. Do you understand, Barbara?
Very helpful, though.
Good.
Thank you.
Good, darling. Good. Oh, sorry, I'm getting too close to the iPad. You see up my nostrils. Okay, what else, darlings? Come on. Nothing. I cut you short sometimes. I'm going to cut you. Here we go. Who's that? Shivani, talk to me. Talk to me.
Yeah, hi. A little odd question.
Go on then, be odd.
Thanks. I struggle with the understanding of the law of karma. I know it is from ancient times, but I can't still wrap my head around it, saying that when we made the mistake, we were allowed to make the mistake, but we suffer in another time when we do not know where the cause was, and we are working in a dark space. And then what I studied, I understand that laws of karma are compassionate, but this just doesn't seem compassionate to me. That
but
the
you're only mentioning the negative things. I mean, you're only mentioning the negative things, Shivani. So let's, for example, if I use the analogy of, first of all, karma is a natural law. No one made it up. No one is running it. It is not punishment and it is not reward. You've got to absolutely understand that. It's a bit like, it's a natural law. Natural law means, like botany is a natural law. Would you agree that botany is a natural law? That seeds go in the ground and then at one day they will ripen, won't they? Now, talk to me. Keep your thing off. Unmute yourself. Let's have a conversation. So, you would not say, so if you don't learn botany, if you don't know the law of botany and you're living, especially if you're living in the tropics in India, things grow all the time, right? But you don't ever say, well, I don't know when I planted that. That's not fair that it should grow. But it's the law of botany, baby. You better learn the law of botany, and then you can control your garden. So it's nobody doing it to us, sweetheart. What's implied in your question is when you say it's not compassionate, it's like someone's punishing you. That's the implication. And that's what we tend to think in religion, that God is punishing and God rewards. But the Buddha's view is there's no punisher and there's no rewarder. So the learning is, so it's exactly, see, the other thing is it's also all the good things as well. You don't ask, well, you know, let's say in this life, and I've got a good family and there's money in the bank and I have a good education. You don't say, but I don't know when I created that. It doesn't seem very fair that I should get the result. You're just happy to get the result, right? Because all the good things are exactly the same. So the flowers in your garden, you don't know when you planted those either, but they're growing. So aren't you fortunate? So you'd better learn the law of karma. So you learn from your experiences and know that all your happiness is the fruit of your past virtuous actions, and all your suffering is the fruit of your non-virtuous actions. It's a pretty straightforward concept, but it's not punishment, sweetheart. It's not reward. There's nobody running this law. It's no such concept of a creator in Buddhism. So if you hear it this way, it's much more down to earth, and then you feel like you're responsible. Well, if this is true, I had better learn to know this law of karma so I can learn to run my life. I'd better learn the law of botany so I can control my garden. That's the approach, sweetheart. You get my point?
Yes.
Does that help?
Yes, a lot.
You've got to make it a much bigger view. We tend to think of karma only in terms of the bad things, but that's really superstitious. When you keep saying, so I repeat it continuously, a natural law, no one makes it. It's just the way the world is. It's not punishment. It's not reward. When you get past that, you can hear it better. And it refers to all your good things. Every tiny bit of your life that's good, where you have friends and family and money in the bank and good health, it's not accidental, darling. And you don't remember when you planted all those seeds of virtue, but you must have logically. So you be happy with that, and then you learn from it. And you know, if your mind does continue, like Lord Buddha says it will, if your mind does continue after you die, you want to make sure you have a really good life in the future. If you want a garden in 25 years, you don't wait for 25 years to come. You sow the seeds now. That's the attitude, sweetheart. You make it much more proactive and optimistic. That's the attitude towards it. Does that help?
Right. Yes. Can I ask one more question?
Yes, of course you may. Yes.
You were talking about fear when I joined in, that, you know, how fear plays on our mind,
Yes,
and fears and
yes.
phobia. It's very often that we are unable to find ourselves to create the right thoughts because of these fears and these preconditionings, which is when we perhaps generate more negative karma for ourselves in the future. And the bigger problem, like you said right now, is detachment, an inability to detach, feeling too attached. Is there a concept or understanding which can help me find a breakthrough in excessive attachment and being detached?
You mean attachment to people, for example, you mean? Or not?
People, outcome, both.
What, sweetheart?
People, outcomes also. Sometimes there's an excessive attachment.
I hear you. See, again, it's a very fine distinction. There's nothing wrong with planning something. You know, if you start to study a certain course that'll take you 5 years, everything is related to the outcomes. So to have a motive, the key difference is to have good motivation instead of just attachment, which becomes very self-centered. I want to get this so I can get famous, so I can have this, so I can have money, or I want to have a nice house so I can have this and have that. And then you're afraid of the outcome not working. That's attachment. So learn to try and do whatever you do with a good motivation of wanting to develop yourself as a human being. So I want to get married. I want to have babies. I want to get rich. I want to do this. Have it with a bodhisattva attitude, a wish that you want to be beneficial to others. So then your motivation is more deep and more appropriate, and it gives you the space to do those things with a happy mind and not be afraid. And then if the outcome doesn't come, then you're still happy. It's okay. But, you know, so replace attachment with more compassion and more positive motivation to want to be a better person so you can be happy, so you can also help others. Make that more the motivation. It's more spacious. Does that make sense?
It does.
I mean, giving up attachment doesn't mean giving up wanting money, giving up wanting husbands and children. If you're going to, that's your life and you want to do those things, you try to do it not just with attachment, which brings fear, but with virtue and goodness to become a better person and so be of use to others. And then it's more space. You understand, darling?
Yeah.
Then you get braver. All right?
Yeah. So intellectually, I understand.
Well, that's a good start. You've got to understand intellectually first. And then you practice it every day. Be patient. The first step is intellectual understanding. Then it becomes experiential. But you practice every day, sweetheart, in your mind. Okay?
Yes.
All right, darling?
Thank you.
Good. Thank you so much. Okay, you darling people, that's enough. Done. We're done. Okay, a whole hour. So much good stuff. So many questions. Thank you so much, everybody. So keep working. And to the degree that the Buddhist view has any meaning for you, please, you can use it. Otherwise, you can ask Richard for his methods. He sounds like he's got a method. All right? Okay, darlings. Thank you. Much love. And I'll be back in Santa Fe.
Thank you.
soon, for those of you in Santa Fe. Goodbye, sweethearts. Thank you.
Thank you,
Travel safe.
Thank you, Robina.
Bye, darling.